So, good evening, Haiti Oropesa with Florida U Judge, and I'm here with April Griffin, who's going to be co-hosting with me tonight. Thanks, April, for joining me. And I also have Attorney Allison Ferber Miller, who is the capital case coordinator for the Sixth Circuit. That covers Pinellas and Pasco, the public defender's office. And she's here this evening because she's done something incredibly impressive to me. She's very passionate about defense of capital cases. And recently you went to the Pinellas County legislative delegation and you proposed a bill, right?
Correct. Yes. And
so tell us about that. Tell us about that.
It's very kind. Yeah, I think you put it well in that I have been working death penalty cases about a decade here in Pinellas, Pasco County. And what I really want to focus on is I don't think I'm asking anybody to consider anything liberal or radical or even controversial. The state of Ohio recently passed a very similar bill to the one I drafted with my colleague, Meg Russell. Governor DeWine signed it into law on January 9th, 2021. It'll take effect 90 days from signature, passed by a Republican legislature in Ohio that is doing exactly what I'm asking the legislature here to consider doing, which is to exempt the seriously mentally ill from the death penalty. I think that those of us that do this work can see the flaws in how the death penalty is enacted. And I think one of the biggest ones is that the death penalty doesn't serve as a deterrent to violent crime. In fact, the opposite. The statistics or studies have shown that states that have the death penalty and actually execute people have higher rates of violent crime. And the reality is those people who are about to commit murder punishable by the death penalty are rarely in a clear-headed mind to think, I better not do this, I might get the death penalty. And so that's sort of the point, is it not serving the death penalty not serving it as a deterrent function, because folks aren't thinking, I shouldn't do this, I might get the death penalty, right? And so because of that, we as a nation have said that we're not going to execute those who are intellectually disabled, what we used to consider mental retardation. There's a progeny of decisional law out of the Supreme Court of the United States that says it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment to execute somebody who's intellectually disabled or mentally retarded. And so what I'm asking the legislature in Florida to consider doing is expanding that, right? We have that recognized and codified in Florida statute, as well as rule of criminal procedure. And so I'm asking the legislature to consider expanding the exclusion of the intellectually disabled for the death penalty to also exclude the seriously mentally ill. And then as the legislature, they would define, obviously I have some proposals in my draft bill, but the legislature would define what qualifies as serious mental illness. And I appropriated a lot of the language from the bill that recently passed in Ohio. And there's been some other states that have had successful legislation. And I think, a recent poll showed that folks were in favor like 2-1 for those with serious mental illness of life in prison versus the death penalty for folks who'd committed murder who also were seriously mentally ill. So, that's in summary what I have done. And I see the senators joined. We've had an opportunity to meet and kind of conversate about this particular topic.
Good evening, Senator, and thank you for joining us. And you are my senator. He's my senator. And he represents District 24. And he's an amazing lawmaker. He's one of my favorite. He's has sensible, reasonable, good legislation that he proposes and backs and promotes for the good of this state. So, Senator, tell us a little bit about your involvement. And have you already filed a bill, the one that's similar to the one in Ohio?
I have not filed it yet, but I know it's in drafting and it's getting worked on. But I'm very excited about it. I mean, I think it's a great piece of legislation, and it should be the right policy for the state of Florida.
Okay. And Allison, so for those of you who are following and joining tonight's broadcast, you can call in 813-221-9700 if you have any questions for Senator Brandis or for Attorney Allison Ferber Miller. Is there anything else that you want to add, Allison? You were interviewed recently by Mitch Perry.
Yes.
And so I did get a chance to read the article about the interview. And you did already mention that it's already been the Supreme Court banned the imposition of the death penalty on intellectual disability.
Correct. And so this is pretty similar. And that's where Florida has both statute and rule of criminal procedure that says this is the process, right? When the defense attorney or the judge or even the prosecutor recognize that intellectual disability may be a factor, that the defendant may be intellectually disabled. Typically, it's the defense attorney that would move the court to bar death as a possible penalty. And then both sides would have an opportunity to have experts evaluate that defendant. And then there'd be a hearing, right, where the judge would make a determination by clear and convincing evidence whether that threshold has been established. And so we're really asking the same. And to be honest with you, most times when I speak to members of the legislature or the community about this, I think most people think the seriously mentally ill already are exempt from the death penalty, right? So at the Pinellas legislative delegation, some of the representatives, some of the members came up to me afterwards. They were like, wait, we do this? This is something we're executing the seriously mentally ill. And that's, you know, I run a lot of things by my parents, who are both pretty educated, but sometimes we're on different sides of the political spectrum. And my parents said kind of the same thing, like, wait, I thought we had already agreed we weren't going to execute the seriously mentally ill and the intellectually disabled. And so I think that's just kind of a natural consequence. The law calls it the evolving standard of decency, is that where we're at now is that I think most people, even those in favor of the death penalty, would agree that we shouldn't be executing the seriously mentally ill. And Florida, in fact, leads the country in death row exonerations, which I think should be considered. So the national average is 1 in 10. Florida's is 1 in 3. So for every 3 defendants sentenced to die, 1 is executed, or excuse me, 1 is exonerated. And so, you know, with the instances of factual innocence on death row, I think we don't want to add executing the seriously mentally ill. Particularly those folks are most vulnerable, I think, to being potentially wrongfully convicted because they're unable to assist in their own defense and things of that nature.
I wanted to ask you this because the article did say that the Ohio law that went into effect outlined specific mental illnesses, which you didn't want to do that in your proposal. You wanted to kind of just keep that open so that once you file a motion in a case where you believe that a client is would qualify for asking the court not to allow the state to impose the death penalty, you just wanted to leave that open. So talk to us a little bit about that. And again, for those of you who are watching, you can call in 813-221-9700. Senator Brandes has taken some of his time. I'm sure super busy up in Tallahassee now during session. And so he's here to answer any questions that you might have regarding this topic. Allison.
I laugh because Senator Brandes asked me pretty much the exact same thing. Certainly I'm willing to negotiate. It's not an all or nothing proposition for me, but why there is some logic or thought behind what I proposed, in that I think you can find experts, right, on both sides that would say this person either meets or does not meet the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia, for example, right? And to me, it's not the label of the mental illness that you put on it. It's the effect on the functioning or the impairment of the functioning, right? So these are defendants who are, the reality is different from yours and mine, right? They're typically have experiencing some sort of psychosis or hallucinating, responding to command hallucinations in some of the more dramatic or drastic examples. And so the point I was trying to make is one doctor can call it one thing and another doctor could call it something else. And just because a doctor labels it something different doesn't mean there's any less value in the court determining the impairment of functioning it's having on that defendant at the time that he or she committed the crime. But certainly if the legislature says we need to label these, and I think it's important. I mean, I think Ohio had 4 specific serious mental illnesses that they had as a part of the bill. I'm certainly more than willing to negotiate or consider that point. That was just my logic and where I went with that.
Yeah, they had schizophrenia, bipolar, I think delusional. I have to find it here in the article, but we do have a comment from Trevor Rosine, and we'll give this question to Senator Brandes. Is there a way we can follow along with the progress of this bill? Maybe a bill name I can search for on the legislature site. You haven't filed that yet.
Yeah, once it's filed,
you want to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Once it's filed, you can follow. Just usually it's just a Google search of 2021 and the Senate bill or the House bill number. So you'll be able to follow that through the process using just a quick Google search of that information. And then obviously we will provide regular updates versus Twitter or Facebook as this continues to go through.
Okay, great. And David Moran just commented, and he provided the link in the comment section in order for those who want to follow the progress of the bill.
Yeah, you can follow it there as well.
Katie,
Yes,
if I can
April.
interject, I don't see this as a partisan issue at
No.
all. And I think that the more people that know about it, that can get out there and educate people on it, the better. This is not a partisan issue at all. So I commend you both for moving this forward. I think this is something that should have been done a long time ago. Thank you.
Thanks for trying.
Okay, so final thoughts either of you'd like to leave the viewers with?
Senator?
I'm just excited about this piece of legislation. I mean, I think people are shocked that this isn't the policy in the state of Florida already. I think it's time to have this conversation. Florida shouldn't be executing people who are clearly mentally ill. And that the simple truth is most people just don't know what Florida's policy is as it relates to the mentally ill and the death penalty. But it's time that we look at our policies. It's time that we address this. And I'm excited to take the lead on this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for joining myself and April, my co-host for this evening. And for those of you that are viewing, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back on because we are going to have, I didn't have this scheduled, but I did speak earlier. It just was published out in some outlets. The president of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Mitchell Stone, the president, he's asked to, if you want to, you can stay or go, Allison, at this.
Thanks,
Have a great evening, and thanks for coming on and
Thank
educating
you.
the public and telling about. Good job on your proposal. We're going to in a couple of minutes jump back on, or actually like around 6:30. For those of you who are viewing, I spoke briefly prior to this broadcast with the president of FACTL, Florida Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys, Mitchell Stone, and again, he's written a letter yesterday to Governor Ron DeSantis. He also addressed it to the Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections and the Surgeon General of the state of Florida, asking them to consider also prioritizing COVID-19 vaccination for those who participate in the criminal justice system, including attorneys, judges, and defendants. So we are going to jump back on. Myself and attorney Chris Parker, I think he's going to be jumping on and co-hosting with me around 6:30ish. Thank you for watching this broadcast, and we will be back. I think April, she keeps coming in and out.
Yes.
So we will jump back on at 6:30. Okay.